Most players do very normal batting. It is hard to face a bowler at anything over 75 miles an hour when it comes to what you're actually doing with the ball. It's just too fast. So, a lot of the reasons the players at this level actually make it is because they can simply saccade their eyes where they believe the ball will go. Facing spin is a little bit different. The two are related. Making the decisions based on your eyesight, knowledge, and reflexes play a little bit more of a part. But a test player once told me that a lot of batting is simply reacting to what they see. They're not even really thinking about it. But of course, there are always some of the others who see the game on a different level, well beyond the basic footwork, hand eye coordination, eyesight, and patience that most players have. For want of a better term, let's call these batting geniuses. One of my all-time favourites is George Headley, and it's a shame that he played so little Test match cricket and also happened to be around when Don Bradman was, because what we know about him, outside just his incredible average, is completely awesome. And his overall record is actually far worse because he probably missed a few peak years due to World War II and then had to come back as an old man when he probably shouldn't have been playing anymore. But let's go back to when George Headley was just the shit and what he did to find a little bit more edge. With him, it was two things. First was the hands. This is one of my favourite stories in cricket just because of how unnecessarily cruel it is. And it's about what Headley would do to spinners. Headley had incredibly fast feet, think Pujara or Michael Clarke, and he loved to come down the wicket. And that was fairly normal in his era. Spin bowling was incredibly slow at this point. Here is Clary Grimmett bowling, and he took 1,000,000 wickets and was one of the fastest to ever do it after being ignored for generations. He was about 73 years old when he made his debut, and he invented the flipper and was pretty much undetectable from the hand. But he was still slow as anything. The point here is that in Headley's time, it was easier to run down the wicket. But even so, it's what he did next. Headley would run down the wicket and hit the ball as hard as he could straight back at the spinner, trying to injure or at least stiffen their fingers. That's incredible. But he actually did something else that was kind of along the same line, maybe less threatening, but just as physical. He would hit the ball in the field to where the bowlers were standing. He assumed correctly that tired bowlers would be easy to handle late in the day. So by the time they came back for their second or third spell, Headley made sure that they had a lot more miles in their legs. And it's that kind of manipulation of the field and placement that gets Jarrod me and Dad on our list. We could probably do an entire video on the tricks that me and Dad used to stay ahead of the opposition, but I've picked out two of my favorites. The first one perhaps may not sound that incredible to you because you've grown up probably watching white ball cricket. But me and Dad invented this when white ball cricket was still, well, largely red ball cricket. Think about a fielding map for an ODI or a T20. And let's say the bowler is delivering in the middle or in the death, but outside of the power play. You'll have lots of sweepers out. But even as you're covering the majority of the boundary, there's almost one place where there's almost never a fielder, and that is deep cover. So me and Dad essentially invented the lofted cover drive so it could chip the ball safely over a fielder in the ring. Hitting the cover drive with the straight bat in the air is not actually that easy technically. It's not how most batters are brought up. Even now, a lot of the batters who hit that gap tend to do so with an angled face. And also, me and Dad was doing this 40 years ago, and still the majority of batters struggle to pull this off regularly. But me and Dad did even more manipulation. And the other one is quite pragmatic. This one shows his kind of pure supervillain energy. Apparently when he was facing spinners and they put all the fielders out, because obviously he'd been smashing them everywhere, he'd then start edging the ball back onto his pads in a way of dragging the field back in. And I've been told this by several of his former teammates. They swear it's a real thing. And it completely fits what we know of him as a cricketer, being that he dominated a pretty tough batting era in Test cricket and did it over a couple of generations. I think it's safe to say we already knew he was a batting genius. This might just elevate him a little bit. And it's not the only story we have that is similar to that. Len Hutton was fond of playing and missing against poorer bowlers. And if you don't know much about Len Hutton, it's worth knowing that he was absolutely next level as a batter, one of the best batting averages of all time. He was probably of that last era where almost all the best batters in the world came from England. He just made a lot of runs. And he made a lot of hundreds. He batted a lot. But to get back to the playing and missing on purpose story, I love the idea that if he had a bowler he didn't think was that good, to keep them on as long as possible, he would play and miss. Because think about it this way, he still needed to be close enough to the ball to make it look legit. But obviously, they're not close enough to actually take the edge. If this is true, how well was he actually seeing the ball to ever pull this off? So far, all the players I've mentioned have ended up with huge test averages, and you probably thought they were pretty good already. But I want to tell you about someone else who ended up playing the same amount of tests as Don Bradman, but averaged a quarter of the great man. There's no doubt that Mark Ramprakash ended up as a bust in tests, although we did see glimpses of how good he could be, like his 2 test tons happened to be against the West Indies and Australia, who both had, shit yourself bowling lineups. And we should take a look at his first class average by year, especially towards the back end of his career. It's still one of the most extraordinary runs in red ball cricket anywhere. But I want to talk about what I saw of late Ramprakash when I moved to the UK and would haunt the Oval Press Bowl. Ramprakash actually taught me a lot about cricket writers, who I understood all understood the technical. But when I found myself having to show them what Ramprakash was doing with my feet, I realized that they didn't know that, and also that he wasn't normal. Essentially, Ramprakash was facing left-arm seamers with his foot already set up to drive on the offside. So instead of opening up, which is what kind of everyone does to left-arm seamers, he was closed off. It was a bit like George Bailey's technique, but to a left-hander, and it made more sense. I should add that I've asked Bailey to explain his technique to me several times, and he has, and I still don't get it. But I think Ramprakash's idea was much more simple, to stop him nicking off to wide balls from left armers. But also, what I think was part of the plan was to make them bowl straighter to him so he could pick them off his pads all day long. That's small g genius. But let me capitalize it for you when it comes to Ramprakash, because he had a theory about breaks. Batters play safe coming into lunch and tea. In fact, I'll probably do a video about that one time. And therefore, bowlers often go through the motions a little bit. So Ramprakash went completely the other way and looked to attack in this over, often finding around 8 to 10 runs of low-hanging fruit. I love the thinking behind that, of exploiting the way that cricket is actually played. But let's look at some freakier stuff. Majid Khan and Barry Richards had both at times batted with the edge of their bat. And these weren't modern bats, as Richards likes to let us know. Think about bowling to a guy that you heard can do this. It doesn't really matter what they do next. They entered each match with this psychological boost over all the bowlers. But it gets better when you hear the story about Sunil Gavaskar, who probably because of his reputation and commentary is not remembered in his proper place. But when Gavaskar retired, he had the most runs in Test cricket. This bloke had game. But what I like is some of the individual stories. Like how he's talked about how he could tell if Michael Holding was going to bowl a bouncer or not, depending on what foot he started his run-up with. But there was another really good story in which Gavaskar claimed, in an angry letter to the editor, which is of course his way, that he batted left-handed in a Ranji match. The idea was to negate the turn of Raghuram Bhatt and Vijaya Krishna. They were 2 left-arm fingers, and when the off-spinner came back on, he moved back to right-handed. Oh, and this wasn't a club game or in the net. This was a Ranji match. Actually, it was a Ranji semi-final. And I want to add one last one, which was told to me by an old Australian cricketer one time, and it's about the Australian opening batter, Sid Barnes, who was fairly well known as the prankster, and what we would now refer to in Australian cricket as a loose unit. For instance, he once turned up to be 12th in a Shield game, but wearing a grey suit with a red carnation, carrying a tray with cologne on it, a portable radio and cigars. But this was a man who could bat though. Test cricket missed his best years because of World War II, but he still managed 13 tests and an average of 64. In first-class cricket, he dropped another 8,000 runs at 54. Plus, during a Lord's Test match, he bet £8 at 15-1 on the fact that he would score 100. Sadly, he made a golden duck in the first innings, but he did make 141 to claim his bet in the second. That, my friends, is confidence. And this leads me back to what that older player said. He said that when Barnes went up against a fast bowler who was very quick, he had a theory on how to mess with their heads a little bit. He would bet that guy that they wouldn't be able to bowl him, meaning that this poor, young, dumb fast bowler would be charging in and bowling as full and as fast as possible. And Barnes had an incredible forward defense. And also, if you slipped onto the legs, he would milk you all day long. Now, I have absolutely no idea if that story is true. In fact, most of the stories that I've told you are probably embellished or changed, or sometimes they're not even from the player that is mentioned. These stories are quite often passed down. You don't always get Sunil Gavaskar writing letters to the editors to explain them. But there's no doubt at the top level of cricket, we certainly had players who think about the game a little bit differently and have the time and creativity to come up with this sleight of hand. I mean, maybe batting geniuses is the wrong name, but I kind of like it.